The guy who pestered me for 7 years died saving me. He was always at the bottom of the class, while I was at the top and got into Cambridge University. Everyone was relieved I could finally be rid of him. But now, back in senior year, all I want is to hold David's hand and tell him, let's study hard together. When I opened my eyes after the car crash, I realized I was back in high school. An hour before the crash, I had just met with David. He was bruised all over, standing outside my building, handing me a neatly packaged cake. All because I had posted on social media about craving a small cake. Under the dim moonlight, his fingers were pale as I tugged my own, refusing him. A car sped toward me from behind, and in that instant, he pushed me aside, sacrificing himself. Everyone said I should be glad no one's bothering me anymore. But I can't forget David's eyes in his final moments. Despairing, yet wanting me to escape the abyss. Now, in senior year again, David's alive. There's time to set things right. David's life shouldn't be erased this way because of me. Ahead is the wall behind the school. Not very high, and since the school doesn't really enforce rules here, it's the prime spot for students to skip class. I spaced out a bit. Then a lazy, chilled voice called out behind me. Hey, move aside. It's David. My heart skipped, and my body instinctively stepped aside. David looked cold, his brows marked with fierce energy. He passed me expressionlessly, casually tossing his bag over the wall and climbed up effortlessly. One swift action, agile and free. I snapped back to my senses and grabbed his shorts in a panic as he was about to jump. I've lived over 20 years and never thought I'd end up pulling someone's pants down in public. It was awkward. But I couldn't let go. David paused, eyebrows furrowed at me incredulously. What are you doing? My face went red. Why, you can't skip class. He chuckled at that, the fierceness on his face faded a lot. Class monitor, aren't you scared of me today? It hit me then, his smile mellow and roguish. So different from his usual cold demeanor. I had transferred to New York High in senior year and was immediately appointed class monitor. Usually, David, who was a troublemaker, kept me distant. I avoided him at all costs. Never bothered him. You've got to come back and study with me. I tightened my grip on his shorts, yanking hard. Off guard, he got pulled down. I heard him mutter a curse, tense. Even if he hits me, I'd still make him go back. Scared I'll hit you, yet won't let go? David looked at me mockingly. Resigned, I closed my eyes. Just hit me, then come back to class with me. David ended up following me back, walking in front, his face dark. Worried he might lash out at others, I sidled up cautiously. David, wanna hit me to vent first? Do I look like a violent maniac? David rolled his eyes. Yeah, kinda. Back at the classroom, David slumped on his desk, annoyed. As I approached, Lily, my desk mate, stopped me. Nancy, why does David look upset? Did you upset him? Did he hit you? He's scary good at fighting. Don't cross him, you just transferred here. Lily looked at me worried. I reassured her it was fine. David was known as the school's bad boy. Skipping classes, fighting, and poor grades. New York High was the city's top school, and people said David got in through connections. Only I knew he got in as the school's top scorer in the entrance exam. David's smart, just not channeling it right. My job was to set him straight. But after class, he vanished again, a no-show. Skipped again, I sighed. David sat at the back corner, where teachers left him alone if he behaved. No one believed he could make it to college. Finally, at the end of the day, my memory led me to an internet cafe David often frequented. Sure enough, he was there gaming. Strict upbringing meant I'd never been to an internet cafe. The place was hot and suffocating with cigarette smoke. Approaching David to call him out, I stood by as he intensely gamed. After about 10 minutes, he seemed to notice me, then diverted back to his screen. Here to drag me to class again? He pulled out a cigarette, casually lighting it. His sleeve slid up, revealing arms covered in alarming scars. Been in a fight? Without a response, I gathered my courage. That's not good. Senior year, college entrance exams. Should be focusing on studying. I earned chuckles from around me before I could finish. Even David laughed. David, where did she come from, your little teacher? Studying is important, what's with the teacher talk? David, cigarette in his mouth, blew smoke my way. I stepped back, choking. He found it funny. Go back, good student. This isn't your place. You can't think being class monitor means you can control me? David never spoke to me like this before, mocking, sarcastic, almost colder. In our past life, our connection was only after high school. Yet I'd never seen him so distant and unfamiliar. David ignored me, continuing his game. I, stubborn, stopped pleading, just waited beside him. He had to leave eventually, right? Many watched with interest. I didn't care, pulling out a notebook to do some problems. Until a blonde guy approached. Hardworking, aren't you? He plopped by me, leering, stop with the homework, keep me company. No thanks, I'm waiting. I scooted away. Waiting for David? He shrugged. He won't notice you. Plenty waiting, but a girl like you won't catch his eye. Better off with me. As he reached to put an arm around me, someone firmly stopped him. David's face was thunderous. Try touching her. He practically dragged me out of there. In front of everyone's shocked eyes, the blonde guy got scared, shivered all over, and quickly ran away. Nancy, do you think you're all that? David looked at me with ice-cold eyes, like I was a stranger to him. He continued in a low voice, if I hadn't come, do you know what would have happened to you? You would have been dragged into an empty alley. With each word, his grip on my wrist tightened. It hurt, and I frowned, but I let him hold on. You would come, just like every dark night in the past life when you silently followed me home. His grip suddenly loosened, and David quickly put on a mocking face. But I caught a panic flash in his eyes. You're overconfident, aren't you? Who do you think you are? Before he could finish, I hugged him lightly and then let go after a few seconds. David was visibly stunned. Nancy, what are you doing? Calming you down, stop being angry. I tried to sound casual but hid my damp palms behind me. David paused before saying, I'm not mad. Also, don't just touch me whenever you want. He suddenly turned and walked away. I quickly followed. Are you going to the internet cafe? Going home. I handed him the notes and math test I had prepared in advance and reminded him to attend class the next day. David's attitude surprised me. I thought he'd at least haggle a bit. But even though he said he'd decide based on his mood, he took them. The next morning during study, I was thrilled to see David there, even though he was slouched over. It's still worth celebrating, at least he showed up. On my desk was the math test I had given him the day before. He had only written one answer for each question, but they were all correct. Lily snatched it from my hands, saw the name, and sneered. I thought this troublemaker did his work, but turns out, he copied the answers. He didn't copy. He did it himself. David's smart. Nancy, don't be naive. These questions are tough. Can he really solve them? Even Harry didn't get them all right. Harry's our class leader, a top student who always ranks in the top 10 for the monthly exams, especially in math. He's almost always perfect. Seeing my silence, Lily assumed I agreed and said nothing more, going back to her book. After school, washing my hands at the sink, I bumped into Harry coming out of the bathroom. He's usually quiet, but today he talked to me. Nancy, was that you near the internet cafe yesterday? I saw a girl who looked like you. I replied honestly, yeah, I was there to give David his homework. Harry frowned. Girls should avoid that area. There are lots of troublemakers around. I nodded, thanking him politely. As I was about to leave, he added, and Nancy, you might not know since you're new, but David's grades are bad. and his morals aren't great. You should stay away from him." The contempt in his voice made me uncomfortable. Before I could argue, a tall figure suddenly came between Harry and me. David, wearing a baseball cap, leaned lazily against the door, smirking. "Sorry, dear classmate, the bad student and the class leader are off to the library. Make way, please." I've suggested going to the library with David before, but he always refused. Now he wanted to. Under Harry's confused gaze, I nodded. Harry adjusted his glasses, looking a bit odd. "Nancy, don't say I didn't warn you. Keep hanging around with him, and you'll end up getting dragged down." With that, he turned and left. I grabbed David's hand, and he raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" "You said we're going to the library, so no backing out." "Why? Aren't you afraid I'll corrupt you?" I calmly shook my head. "Not gonna happen, I believe that." I meant both myself and David. David smirked. "You sure are confident." In the library, I pulled out that math test and asked him why he didn't show the process. He leaned on the table, lazily twirling a pen, casually glanced and said, "It's too easy, didn't feel like it. Even if you get it right, you won't get many points without showing your work." Didn't someone say I copied the answers? So he heard the conversation with Lily. He side-eyed me, and I said, I stayed quiet because I didn't want a pointless argument. There are too many doubters in this world, and prejudice is everywhere. As long as I believe in you, that's enough. David paused and then pretended to laugh it off, though he quietly picked up a new test paper. I watched him with satisfaction. "Get to it." "All right." Everyone noticed David's changes. He no longer slept through classes or skipped them. Even the head teacher was surprised. But the only thing that didn't change was David's rebellious streak. No one dared talk to him except me. It suddenly dawned on me, when he was with me, he seemed to put away all those sharp edges. Lily looked incredulous. "David, that troublemaker, actually attending morning self-study? What did you give him?" I just smiled. But with someone like him, after 2 years, it's probably just a phase. "Lily, I'd advise you not to get too invested. Guys like him will just end up with a college degree at best," she said seriously. "He won't." I kept taking notes from class, implying for her to stop talking. I said that with confidence, but soon enough, I had to eat my words. Yes, me. David didn't show up for days, and no one could reach him. I tried calling, but he never answered. By Friday, staring at David's empty seat in the back, an unexplainable anger boiled inside me. He hadn't come for an entire week. Even if he didn't plan to come back, he should have at least sent a message. At that moment, Harry came over with a math competition sign-up sheet. I joined every year, so I signed up immediately. David's name was on there too. He doesn't show up for class anymore. No need to. Harry frowned. Yeah, and David can't handle competition questions. You're giving him way too much credit. Lily quickly added. I ignored them and walked on. I wasn't in a good mood today. I needed to talk to David and clear things up. I wasn't sure exactly where David lived, just knew it was near the internet cafe. As I walked into the alley, I overheard 2 girls talking about a drunkard who often showed up there lately. He's brutal, I saw him beating up a guy last time. The guy was in terrible shape, barely alive on the ground. And I heard that guy was his son. Their voices faded as they walked away, but the more I heard, the more anxious I felt. It started getting dark, and the streetlights came on at the alley entrance. My ears caught the shattering sound of a bottle violently hitting the wall. I saw David huddled in the dark, a small heap. The surrounding darkness seemed like it might swallow him. I softly called out, "David?" "Don't come over," he replied. His voice cold in the empty alley. I clutched my backpack straps tightly. "I'm here to bring you notes," I said. "Don't need them. Go home." But he cut me off with a low growl. "Nancy, can't you understand when I say go home? Nearby, the sound of breaking bottles started again. Scared, I took a step back. Outside the alley was a splash of neon lights. As long as I got out, I'd be safe. Helping David this far was enough. I've already tried hard to make up to him. Nancy, you've done your best. Just leave it. Run. I ran desperately. Ran towards the dark figure. Seeing the shock in David's eyes, I also saw his body covered in bruises. David, let's get out of here together. I grabbed him and we ran out as angry drunken shouts chased us. David clasped my hand, leading me blindly forward. Once we were safe, I finally broke down and cried. It was the first time I saw such panic in David's eyes. Helplessly, he wiped my tears. What's wrong? Did it scare you? David, does it hurt? I didn't even dare to touch him. His body was all bruised. His face was mottled blue and purple, and his forehead was bleeding a little. With a heavy sigh, David rested his head on my shoulder. A hug and it won't hurt. It was so quiet around us. I got the housekeeper to leave and gestured David to come upstairs. I brought David home with me. My mom travels a lot, coming back about once a month, so our housekeeper generally takes care of my daily needs. When I opened the door, David was sitting upright and seriously on a chair. I took out the first aid kit to disinfect his wounds. This might sting a bit. David didn't say anything, just silently watching me. After a moment, he quietly asked, Nancy, why did you run over? Why? Yeah, I could have run away by myself. At that moment, I had only one thought. I didn't want to leave him alone anymore. I didn't want to see you get beaten up. I glanced at him. Can't you fight back? Clearly, he's one tough guy in a brawl. David said that man was his dad. Usually normal, but turned violent when drunk. Just a beating, whatever. My dad has it rough, too. I learned later that David's mom died when he was born. His dad raised him for more than a decade, and David always believed he caused his mom's death. So he put up with his dad's violence. Hearing this, my hand slipped, causing David to yelp in pain. I quickly covered his mouth, but something tripped me, and I fell into him. We tumbled to the floor in a heap. The commotion made the housekeeper come knocking, asking if I was all right. I was on top of David, signaling him to stay quiet. I said, just tripped, I'm fine, really. After the housekeeper left, I finally relaxed, resting my head on David's chest for a breather. Nancy, could you get off me? David's voice broke the silence. Finally realizing I was still on him, I quickly got up, grumbling, David, your belt dug into me. Then I noticed David's ears turning red, even his neck. Sorry. I quickly came to my senses, then realized David wasn't even wearing a belt. I was confused and suddenly it dawned on me. Awkward. The room fell silent. My face was burning, and I casually turned off the lights, burying my face in the blanket. I'm going to sleep. David set up a spot on the floor, lying quietly. As I began to drift into sleep, I heard him suddenly say, Nancy, I didn't mean to shout at you earlier. Yeah, I know. I just didn't want to scare you. He certainly did. His face was all banged up, tugging at my heart. Softly, I said, David, if he hits you again, just run, okay? David's too skilled to not dodge his dad's attacks. He just chooses not to. Okay. David, I signed you up for the math competition. Once your injuries heal and the event gets closer, why not give it a shot? Okay. Sweet, agreeable David. Once David was feeling better, I explained everything to his teachers and got him excused from classes. I made sure to bring him all the class notes. He took studying seriously, completing every assignment, diving into the lessons. He had a real knack for it, especially the science stuff. He was catching up quickly on what he'd missed. Don't skip the math steps, they'll cost you points. I know. On competition day, Harry was taking attendance. When he called David's name, he didn't see him. The class started whispering. David enter a competition? That's a joke. He hasn't been to class forever. Compete? Seriously? Harry looked at me. Nancy, it's about to start. If David doesn't show, I'm striking his name off. Just wait, he'll be here soon. As soon as I said that, David walked into the room. He had a baseball cap on. Apart from some blue marks around his lips, you could barely tell anything was wrong. Went home for a bit. Ready? His voice still carried that lazy tone. He waved for me to join him, and we walked into the competition room together. Harry didn't even glance our way, just turned and walked out. Everyone knew, Harry was sure to win the competition once again. Hardly anyone thought about David. I told him not to worry, just do his best. This time was just a warm-up. David smiled, gave me a hug near the test room, and went in. Even I didn't expect that David would take first place in the school competition. The day the ranking came out, David was first, Harry second, and I was third. Everyone was shocked. Even the homeroom teacher couldn't believe it. He praised David in front of the whole class, saying, "Wow, David, you hardly attend, and then you surprise everyone like this." David lay on his desk, looked at me when he heard the teacher, and smiled. I owe it all to Nancy for looking out for me. He winked at me, his eyes bright and full of youthful energy. I looked back at David, my heart racing. Harry sat in his seat, his hands shaking a little with the test paper. His back was stiff as he stood up silently under the class's gaze. The screech of the chair against the floor was unpleasant. He looked calmly at me and David, then shouted, "Teacher, I want to report that Nancy helped David cheat." The homeroom teacher's face turned serious. What's going on? Harry claimed he saw David take something from my bag before entering the exam. My bag had nothing that could be used to cheat, just a little bell. Suddenly realizing, I quickly opened my backpack and searched nothing there. The bell was something I bought on a whim from a shop, a cute little thing that reminded me of David instantly. I had planned to give it to him on the competition day but thought it was too childish, so I didn't. The class started whispering. Compared to David's sudden progress, everyone leaned towards believing he cheated. The teacher asked, "Is that true, Nancy?" I denied it. David stood up, unfazed, and calmly pulled the bell out of his pocket. I only took a bell inside. Does that count as cheating? Harry couldn't believe it. No way. David said, "You can check the surveillance. I'll cooperate with any investigation," but Nancy had no idea. When I got home in the evening, I asked David why he took my bell. Wasn't it a gift for me? I blushed. Who said I was giving it to you? Well, it's mine now, David grinned mischievously. He rarely had such a carefree smile. He usually looked so serious, like he was too cool to care. I suddenly noticed something, like discovering a new continent. David, you've got dimples. Hey, why are you so close? He poked my forehead with his finger, looking a bit embarrassed. I realized how close we were at that moment. And with the weather warming up, I had on a thin shirt. I felt a bit annoyed. Nancy, this is the second time. You're supposed to be encouraging him to study, and what are you doing now? Be mindful of your impression. I took a deep breath, shoved all my homework at him, told him to complete it, and then ran away. David called after me to slow down, reminding me we were having breakfast together the next day. The next morning, I got up early and left without having my aunt make breakfast. Sure enough, David was already near my house waiting. Why so early? He casually folded down my flipped-up collar. Just got here. My mom always says food outside isn't clean, so I rarely eat out. But today, the breakfast with David was unexpectedly good. Isn't it delicious? David thoughtfully arranged the dishes for me. As he leaned closer, I caught a faint scent. It was the usual laundry detergent scent, but today it seemed different. I wanted to smell more carefully and accidentally bit my tongue. The sharp pain made my eyes tear up. Are you okay? David quickly handed me several tissues. I shook my head. A moment later, he gently grabbed my chin and made me open my mouth. You're bleeding, there's a cut, he frowned, checking before offering me water to rinse. At that moment, my heart raced uncontrollably. I couldn't even hear what David was saying, just watching his handsome face and lips moving. I wanted to kiss him. I'm crazy. Nancy, come to my office. Before the end of school, the homeroom teacher called me. When I got there, Harry was there too. On the desk were a bunch of report cards. The teacher nodded approvingly. You both did well. With a bit more effort, next term you'll be up for recommendation. Our school's starting a study group. You two should attend after school. New York High School is a century-old institution, known for excellent faculty and staff. The study group is actually a fast track for top students to excel in the final stages. Teacher, let David join too. Harry was surprised, looked at me, and scoffed. The study group is for the top 10 in the year. Yes, David has won a competition, but his overall scores are unstable. This isn't the right fit, the teacher nodded. After school, Harry caught up, suggesting we go together. I glared at him. What about you accusing me of helping David cheat? Harry went white for a moment, then composed himself. Sorry, I misunderstood, but I meant it for your good. You and him aren't the same. It's a critical time for school. It's better not to get too involved with him. If you don't listen, I'll have to tell the teacher. The teacher is an old friend of my mom who travels a lot for work, so he looks out for me. Everyone knew I was close to David, even the homeroom teacher warned me once. Harry knew and used it against me. I was speechless, quietly heading to the study group. Just then, David, who should have left, suddenly appeared at the stairs. Nancy, heading home together? I had been avoiding David, keeping my distance to not be alone with him recently. I hesitated for a moment. Nah, I have to go to my tutoring class. You go ahead. Don't worry, I'll make sure Nancy gets home safe. Harry said, looking all pleased with himself. A black hat shaded those cold eyes, and his expression was hard to read. David smirked slightly. Suit yourself. With that, he turned and walked away. I watched his back, called out to remind him to do his homework, but he didn't stop. I knew then, he was upset. After that day, things between David and me started getting worse, fast. He stopped talking to me. Sure, he was distant, but he was a decent guy. Good at basketball too, and he began to make friends. Sometimes I saw him in the hallways, surrounded by people, laughter, and youthful energy everywhere. A few times I wanted to call out to him, but every time he just brushed past me, pretending not to see. He'd still do his homework though, even studied harder than before. The teachers praised him a few times in class. That seemed like the high school life David was meant to have. One day after tutoring, Harry called out to me, asking for help with a problem. It was getting dark, so I noted it down and told him we could look at it later. But Harry held my arm, blushing a bit. Let me walk you home. I frowned, pushing his hand away. Honestly, if it weren't for David, I wouldn't even be hanging out with Harry this much. In the past life, we were just acquaintances. No, thanks, I said, but Harry wouldn't let up. Just then, a basketball came out of nowhere and knocked Harry's hand away. The culprit strolled down the stairs, all laid back. Oops, slipped. Harry was angry. David, what's your deal? David walked between us, his uniform draped over his shoulder, revealing just a hint of his smooth back under the white shirt. He ignored Harry and walked on, like it was all just a coincidence. I called out to him, anxiety twisting at my insides, wanna walk home together today? He didn't reply but stopped. I rushed to catch up with him. I tried to make conversation the whole way, breakfast, classes, tests, mock exams. David didn't say a word, but he didn't stop me either. Just before reaching home, I sighed and stopped to face him. Are you still mad? The streetlight flickered on, and he looked down, almost laughing at himself. I thought you didn't care. His eyes were deep, full of something like hurt. My heart ached like it had been squeezed tight. David looked at me, eyes filled with grievance and a hint of something else. That day in the alley, I didn't expect you to come over. I thought maybe dying was better, but you grabbed me. You started this, Nancy. I thought you were different. But in the end, you bailed on me. This teenage boy, hands trembling, accusingly asked, "You ran over just to ditch me later?" His words blew away my frustration like dust. When did I abandon you? I held his hand gently, trying to soothe him. Why are you avoiding me since that day? He asked, stubbornly meeting my eyes. I knew he meant the day we had breakfast together. I hesitated. I didn't distance myself, just because of Harry? Do you like guys with good grades? What's that about? I stayed silent too long and he assumed I agreed. David laughed coldly, pulling back his hand. I knew it, you like smart guys. You think I'm just a stand-in 'cause I'm better looking than Harry. Gosh, he's got a whole novel going. I stood on tiptoe to cover his mouth, giving him a stern look. Then, embarrassed and annoyed, I shouted, "Shut up. I like you. Every time I see you, I want to kiss you, dummy." I just wanted to help David study better but didn't expect to catch feelings myself. I'd never felt this way in the past life. When I realized how I felt, I was lost and conflicted. Didn't know how to handle it, especially now with college entrance exams coming up. So I avoided it. The air felt heavy, but strangely, I felt lighter after saying it out loud. David was all flustered, not even knowing where to put his hands, his handsome face flushed. What? You said you want to kiss me? My face burning, I grabbed my backpack and started walking home. If you still want to, that'd be okay. David caught up, stumbling a bit under the moonlight, voice sincere, I like you too. My heart fluttered, a mix of sweetness and excitement, but I kept a straight face. College entrance exams are less than 200 days away. You should focus on studying. Plus, high school students can't date. David's gloom disappeared, replaced with a teasing smile. Got it, my little class president. I couldn't stop smiling all the way home, until I saw my mom. She was standing on the second-floor balcony, having watched everything below, face stern. Nancy, Harry told me you're in a relationship with a delinquent. I didn't believe it. Is this how you repay me? In the past, Mom didn't like David, thought he was trouble, and never let me near him. My parents divorced when I was very young. I ended up with my mom. She's been strict, I had to follow her plans. Friends, whether I took science or arts, which college to attend, all decided by her. Back then, I did everything she wanted, but this time I stood up for myself. David's not a delinquent. He's smart, and we're not dating. She was furious, shaking, pulling out her phone and tossing it to me. It showed her chats with the class teacher. This year is crucial, and you're hanging out with a delinquent. His dad's in jail for assault, his mom's dead, his grades are lousy. Being with him will ruin you. I was shocked. You investigated him? Why? You don't have the right. He's smart, he has potential. I believe. A slap rang in my ears. My rebellion, disobedience, and unpredictability enraged my mom. From then on, she stopped me from going to school, keeping me under strict watch. My phone got taken away, tutors came to the house, and the class teacher called a few times to tell me to focus on exams at home. They had a special spot reserved for me in college. The image of David's tragic death in my past life and his heartfelt confession that night kept flashing before my eyes, tearing at my nerves. Was David going to think I abandoned him again? Later, Harry came by a few times, always bringing me study materials. You don't have to look at me like that, Nancy. You know what I mean. I can't just watch you throw your life away because of someone like that. I never really took Harry seriously, not in the past life or now. I just stared at him coldly and told him to leave. His face went pale, but finally, he left. That day, my mom suddenly decided to transfer me to another school. I refused, only to find out later it was because David had come looking for me. My mom was worried about me getting tangled up with someone like him. I raised you with so much hardship. Do you want to see your mom die? The fear of being controlled came rushing back. Instead of calling myself her daughter, it felt more like I was her puppet. She forced her unfulfilled dreams and ideas on me. If I didn't follow her plan, she'd threaten her own life. Nancy, this is for your own good. Tears streamed down my face, my voice carrying unexpected hatred. No, it's for yourself. My mom looked at me, shocked by the emotions in my eyes. Do you know how I lived in my past life? After David died, everyone was happy that no one bothered me anymore. But no one ever asked if I was happy. He was the only person who loved me, and now he's gone. You never cared about my feelings, just pushed me forward with your ideas. No matter how much I resisted. That car accident, I didn't plan to dodge it, but David died instead. Are you trying to push me to death again this time? There was a strange silence in the room. David came in without me noticing, obviously having overheard. He had lost a lot of weight in just a week, and he walked determinedly to my side. Who told you to come in? Get out. Auntie, please hear me out first. I'm not here today to cause trouble, but to make a promise to you. Standing protectively in front of me, gone was his usual carefree demeanor as he made a solemn promise. I know Nancy is outstanding. I've never asked for anything before, just thought watching her from afar was enough. Everyone thinks I'm hopeless, including myself, but she never did. She made me believe there is hope in this world. I know I'm not worthy of her, but I beg you to give me a chance. I'll do my best to keep up with Nancy. Rest assured, I won't see her again until you're satisfied. I don't remember clearly what happened after that day, but my always strict mom stayed silent and eventually went upstairs without looking at us. I knew this meant she agreed. I returned to school, and just as David promised, he didn't spend time with me alone. He became more diligent and started staying in the dorms. During the school's exams, he surprised everyone by jumping from the last place to the top 50 in the grade. Everyone was amazed at his transformation, and I got busy with various competitions, sometimes gone for half a month at a time. We stayed in touch on our phones, calling each other at night. Not saying much, just being there for each other. Everyone knew David would get into a prestigious university. He had a talent. But his best mock exam score in senior year was only 683, an unexpected good result for everyone. He, however, wasn't quite satisfied. Those final months before the college entrance exams were exhausting, our nerves on edge. He often studied till dawn, and saying goodnight to me got later and later. After the college entrance exams, he fell into my arms and whispered, "Nancy, I did my best." Holding him tightly, I replied, "I know." "David, can I kiss you?" He chuckled, "Nancy wants a kiss?" "No, your mom won't allow it." "Now," I said, cupping his face and pressing our lips together. On the day we checked our scores, I was tenser than David. The score column was blank. Later we found out someone from New York High School got first place in sciences. David. Everyone celebrated, even our homeroom teacher couldn't stop smiling. My mom looked at how happy I was and scolded me for being ridiculous. At the graduation ceremony, David stood on stage with flowers, and Harry just congratulated me before leaving. On stage, someone asked David why he pushed himself to go from failing to science's top scorer in a year. In front of everyone's expectant eyes, David gently hooked his finger at me. After a long pause, he smiled slightly. "To marry my wife."